Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today on the podcast, we're joined by Bobak Tavangar, who is the founder and CEO of Brilliant Labs. Brilliant Labs is an AR company that has just released their latest product called Frame. Frame is a pair of smart glasses that are AI enabled. So you just wear them and you can look at things and you have full access to GPT 4.0 among other models to help you in your everyday life. You can literally wear these glasses, look at yourself in the mirror and go, is my outfit okay? And then get like real-time suggestions from ChatGPT. For example, you can look at a car engine. How does this work? You could look at a portion of food and go like, hey, what calories are in here? What are the macronutrients? And you just have this form factor of glasses you wear on your head, on your face, and you can just talk to your glasses. And it's sort of like the Meta Ray-Bans. However, the key differentiator is that it runs a different selection of models, so not just Meta, and it's fully open source and hackable. That's right. It runs on it runs with an assistant called Noah that is open source, and you can extend its behavior with code. If you're an engineer, this is incredible. It's fully open source. And in our discussion today, we talk about what it was like to build Frame. Bobak has experience previously at Microsoft and Apple. We dive into that. And we talk about the importance of open source, why it's important to keep these things open, hackable, and so on and so forth. We ultimately talk about the hardware journey. And, for us as software engineers, how does one bring a physical product into this world? If you're wondering about how all this works, if you want to bring a product into the world, if you want to have an open source AI enabled set of glasses and understand what that entails, if you want to learn what it was like working at Microsoft and Apple, then this episode is for you. I personally have ordered these glasses. They're on the way. I think they're really cool because in case there's some behavior that's missing, they're open source. So I can just build my own applications. I could even use my own on-device models if I wanted and get the outcome I desire. And that's the power of an open system, as we discuss in this episode. So if that sounds interesting at all to you, stick around. This is going to be a really great episode. Now, I'd love to keep this completely free of cost to everybody. And the way we do that is with sponsors. So let's take a moment to thank the sponsors of today's episode. This episode is sponsored by Code Crafters. My most popular talk ever was called Deconstructing React, where I taught people React by using it but not importing it. And then there were all kinds of errors, like React is not defined. So we defined it from scratch, and we learned React by building our own React. We learned its mechanism. We learned how React works by building our own React. Code Crafters has a similar style of teaching where they take systems like Git, Redis, Docker, etc., and have you build your own version of them in a programming language so that you understand the mechanism. It really helps you level up your game, and if you'd like to give it a try, you get a 40% discount through the Contagious Code podcast if you go to tej.as/codecrafters. That's tej.as/codecrafters. We'll also put links in the show notes. This episode is also sponsored by Stately. Stately.ai is a visualizer that can model your application's logic and then export it to a state machine where all you do is fill in just the business logic and all the other stuff is handled for you. If you'd like to give it a try, go to stately.ai. Finally, we've partnered with That Conference. That Conference, happening in Wisconsin, is really a great opportunity to meet people and level up your tech career. In part of our effort to partner with them, we're giving away 5 free tickets. If you'd like to win one of those, just say so on social media while sharing the episode, and we'll get you in a raffle to win that. Thank you for sticking around so far, and now for my discussion with Bobak Tavangar. Bobak Tavangar, welcome to the Contagious Code podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Tejas.
I am so excited to talk to you today about the Frame glasses, the Monaco device, the open source assistant Noah, all of it. And I can tell you, this podcast is predominantly enjoyed by software engineers and web engineers. And so you're the first person we're talking to with a hardware device, and of course software as well. So I'm really interested to draw lines between idea to production to open source philosophy and all of it in between. Before we dive into all of that, I'd love it if you could maybe give the listeners an introduction to yourself, Brilliant Labs, the whole sort of getting into the AR space and pursuing this symbiosis, as you put it, of humanity and AI. I think it's important. So what we do on the podcast is we draw lines. We start somewhere and we make the dots connect. In a big graph, the edges and nodes matter, right? So with that, I'll let you do your intro.
Absolutely. I started in this industry at Microsoft, of all places. And these were the Steve Ballmer days. So I was fresh out of college, did a brief stint there, and amazingly, despite it being Microsoft under Ballmer, I emerged having learned a lot from some really smart people who were there and cool stuff I got to work on, but also learned a lot about the importance of culture and how Microsoft, at least at that time, was perhaps struggling internally with questions of culture, and also the profound appreciation for the power of technology, that it can amplify latent human capacity in a way that very few things can. And so I felt this really deep sense. I need to devote my life to this. It's really like, the way I view it is, this is all of us who are building, these magical machines. They are a service to mankind, because if we do it right, and at Brilliant we believe that if you do it open, then they might just be the ultimate empowering force in someone's life. So that's really kind of what got me started. I'm a serial founder, so I ran a couple companies. You mentioned graphs. Early company was a graph search. So graph searches, or graphs generally, are something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And then sort of looked a lot at computer vision and core location technologies. Using GPS on a phone and trying to kind of triangulate precise location. And it was in the process of running my second company that I first bumped up against augmented reality. So back then, there were a few pretty rough SDKs. Matio was one of them, Wikitude. There were a few. And we prototyped something for this previous company. And I walked around. I was in Hong Kong back then. I walked around kind of with my phone outstretched in front of me, running this pretty rough prototype in AR. And it felt magical. I was so delighted that I was able to perceive a reality that was not readily apparent to my eyes without the phone, that I was able to elevate signal from the surrounding noise of the city. And that to me kind of let me know that there was this really important layer that was, especially at that time, ill explored in computing and interface and just sort of information technology generally. And so that got me excited. That experience also let me feel for the first time that we were bumping up against the limits of the predominant form factor. And that at that time, and still now, is mobile. And, the software side was becoming so incredibly powerful, but the hardware was just so obviously not attuned to the task. It wasn't focused on delivering a seamless, hands-free AR experience that helped you perceive the world, perceive your life in a totally different way. So, fast forward a couple of years, exited that company, went to go work at Apple. Once again, had an experience at a large company that taught me about the importance of culture. This time, a lot of the positives. Apple really pays attention to culture, and some of the smartest people I've ever worked with, I worked with there. And it's a company on the move. They do ambitious, big things, and they've changed our world over and over again. So learned a lot at Apple, but it was while there that I was excitedly waiting for some company. Magic Leap was in the news. There were a bunch of companies that were working on AR hardware. And I was like, wow, this is so exciting. The next paradigm's about to shift. And I just need to focus on software. If I do an AR company after this, I just need to do software because someone's going to figure out hardware. And it turns out, of course, we all have the benefit of hindsight, but deep-pocketed companies like Magic Leap with an army of some of the smartest people in the world, they couldn't figure it out. There's a bunch of reasons why, but that was really compelling to me. I learned something from that because it showed me that not all problems can be solved by an army of smart people and billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars. That there's something different about those that crack the nut and those that don't, despite immense resources. Sort of a typical David and Goliath story. Um, and that's what ultimately decided or inspired me to take this different path into AR and start Brilliant Labs. So,
Wow.
um, yeah, I'll pause there. But that's like a little bit of my lineage and how I got
Yeah.
into space.
That's an incredible track record. I mean, Microsoft, then a few companies, then Apple. I have seen in the news Brilliant Labs even being compared with Apple, and you yourself being compared with sort of the Apple ethos. Incredible. I think you mentioned this device, this AR device that you used. I believe it was in China. That sort of was the genesis of this idea. Changed the way you see it. Changed, like, really inspired you to be able to extend your perception. That's how you put it. What was that experience? Because in my experience with AR right now, like if I want to show someone the value of AR, like today, my best bet is to pull out my phone, go on Google and type like tiger. And then Google in the search results will surface this augmented reality tiger. And I've got an iPhone with a LiDAR sensor. So it very quickly will read the size of the room and then place it like a tiger in front of me. And people go, wow, that's cool. Okay. and it sort of ends there. So what was this experience that showed you that, hey, this is more than a toy, or this can be more than a toy?
We were working on something pretty cool at the time, and the spirit of that idea still lives in what we're doing now at Brilliant Labs, but we're taking a different path. So, what we did at the time was we built this used some of the core location technology that we developed. We built this engine that picked up your precise location, um, learned your sort of interests, preferences, what events, what types of cafes or restaurants, things around you in these really vibrant, densely built cities that many of us, an increasing number of us, find ourselves living in. Places like Hong Kong or New York, San Francisco, Berlin. And it would sort of train that data on you so that, we started with getting pinged with notifications, but we decided to prototype something in AR so that you could just walk around the city and in a given neighborhood, trained around your precise location, with your personalized preferences baked in, you could just look at that building and say, oh, hey, like there is a cafe there that is highly reviewed, seems perfect for what you're interested in, and it's on the 22nd floor. A place you never otherwise would have discovered unless you knew someone who told you or you, for some reason, decided to stumble up onto the 22nd floor. Um, and so this notion that like there is so much in these beautiful, vibrant cities for us to discover, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of noise. It's harder and harder to elevate signal from noise. And we thought AR would be a really compelling path to do that.
Awesome. Yeah. Now that you mention, I do use Google Maps to navigate sometimes in a new city, and they have this feature where it will leverage the camera of your phone and give you directions, but in AR. So it will literally put arrows on the street. And exactly as you mentioned, I strongly agree. The only reason I don't use that feature is because of the form factor of the phone. I don't want to walk around with a camera in front, like holding my hand out in front of me. I want to look down at my phone and see where I'm going with that compass. So this really does highlight and accentuate the case for a different form factor, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah.
You also said that you learned through various experiences that billions of dollars and an army of really smart people isn't enough. It's oftentimes it's not, and it's true. I mean, we can maybe talk about the Meta Ray-Bans in a bit, but Meta has tried for years to make AR or VR a thing with Oculus, and I own an Oculus. I almost never use it because of the headaches I get with this heavy thing on my head. I have used an Apple Vision Pro, Apple, your former alma mater, almost. And even that, it doesn't work well enough. And these are mega corps, right? They've got billions and billions of dollars and employee skill points, as it were. So you mentioned that stuff hasn't worked so far. When you expected it would, you were like someone's going to figure out the hardware. If anyone's going to figure out the hardware, it's not going to be me. But here we are. So if those things aren't enough, what is? And as a founder, you're probably, your main job, I'm convinced, as a founder, is to make bets. Like I have this instinct, I have this hypothesis. if I can raise the right funds, I can prove it or disprove it. So I'm assuming there's a bet in your mind that where billions of dollars have failed and talented people have failed, there's been a missing ingredient. And I'd love to hear your take on what that is.
Oh man, I mean, this is you could probably do a series of podcasts. I'm sure others have a series of podcasts on this question. Um, I try to boil it down. Okay, so there's question of like people, and like team, and like, is it the right kinds of people, and are they collaborating the right way? Is there a good culture there? Um, there's a lot of that sort of side of things, and we can certainly talk about that. But I'd say that the one that I reflected on the most is um, taking a different path up the mountain. That there are these sort of well-trodden paths up the mountain, and oftentimes um, the billions of dollars and army of smart people are needed to kind of brute force the journey up the mountain. But it doesn't mean it's the best path. It doesn't mean it's the right path. That I try to think about like so many things. I have like Lord of the Rings analogies.
Yeah.
You could have given the ring to one of the armies, one of the human or elvish armies, and they could have tried to brute force it to Mordor, to Mount Doom,
Yeah.
but they gave it to Frodo. They
Yeah.
gave it to a hobbit, for God's sake, and
Yeah.
and not even that many of them. It was Frodo and Samwise at the end,
Yeah.
and somehow just the two of them found uncommon paths through caves and mountains, and they found their way into the mountain. And that's part of it's because they were small, nimble, they could adjust on the fly, they didn't attract too much attention, but also they were underestimated consistently at every turn of the journey, and they just were so mission oriented around bringing this ring to Mount Doom. And so there's something there to being small, mission oriented, taking different paths to the mountain.
Yeah.
That I have no doubt that given enough time, any large company can spend enough money and throw enough people at a problem that they'll figure it out. And we all learn from each other. So, hey, if company A is putting $2 billion into, project one, company B has just launched something in the market, they're going to learn from that. They're going to course correct,
Yeah.
and they're going to compete. So you give them enough time, they'll figure it out. But for us, it was really sort of trying to learn those lessons. Like, what is that different path up the mountain? And in our case, that was avoiding it was a use case question. It was avoiding the typical decision that AR companies, that we'd seen every single AR company walk down this path. They decided that the use case had to be centered around console grade graphics in front of your eyes. And the compute you needed to do that, the battery you needed to do that. Suddenly, industrial design doesn't even matter. You just need your injection molding supplier to make large enough plastic panels around all of these internal components to just keep it enclosed in something. Forget about industrial design. So we just saw company after company walking down that path, and we tried to go down to the first principle of it. And where we landed was, it shouldn't be used this way. This is not the existential reason for existence. The purpose was off. And I think that's been something that's been plaguing AR for a long time. It's been in all of our imagination. Sci-fi, right? Blade Runner, and Iron Man, and there's all these really cool examples of AR on some hero or some sci-fi character, and they're doing cool shit. But it's been the popular imagination. But unfortunately, like, the physics just aren't there to execute on that. But people unconsciously assume that, like, oh, well, we saw it in like Ready Player One, or we saw it in Iron Man, and therefore that's what it has to do. So we really tried to question that and say, no, it shouldn't be for console grade graphics in front of the eyes. Consoles are good for that. PCs are good for that. Maybe VR devices are good for that, or will be good for that one day. Full immersion, the experience is centered around your couch. I happen to agree with you. I mean, I've never had a pleasurable experience with a VR device. Tried Vision Pro a couple months back, and I had a headache for the rest of the day and felt the weight on my forehead and nose for the rest of that day, even after I finished trying it. Like, just that feeling lingered, and it wasn't pleasant. So VR is not for me, but maybe it's for other people. So AR specifically, we said it's got to be AI. It's got to be what the iPod was. It's got to be simple and focused, cost the right amount of money and fit in your pocket. And it's got to transform your relationship with a creative medium. In Apple's case with the iPod, that was music. The iPod was great, not just because we could take more songs with us on the go and it was beautiful, but because we could discover more music and we shared more music, between classes, the commute to work, sitting with your friend on the bench, one ear pod in mine and one ear pod in hers or his, and you were sharing and discovering more. It transformed our relationship with music. And so we looked at that and said, that's what needs to characterize the existence of a device like this, which gives it purpose in our lives. So, we've always been AI focused from day one. We started very focused on computer vision, which is kind of more my roots even before Apple, but broadened pretty quickly, especially over the last 2 years, to include more areas of AI and, of course, generative AI, which has enabled us to move a lot faster and do a lot more. So it's been very exciting. But that different path up the mountain, I think that's key.
Yeah.
But it forces a lot of introspection.
There's a strong case here for scrappy startup versus large scale enterprise. And this, I hope that the listeners, the entrepreneurial listeners, and actually all the listeners here are getting the takeaway that start your thing. Like, even if Meta, Google, whoever can kill you, it doesn't matter, because they probably won't do it in time. There was, with the latest OpenAI announcements, there's often these threads on social media. Oh, look, OpenAI just killed this company. OpenAI just killed that company. And did they, though? Because if the companies are backed by the right founders, they'll pivot. And this is where, so I'm an investor in various startups, early stage startups, and I almost never care about the product and always care about the founder. Because in my mind, great founders pivot and can improvise and will do everything before they decide to fold. In any case, I hope that is an encouragement to people. Okay, let's talk about Frame. I love this product. I don't own it yet, unfortunately, and there's a backlog with shipping, which bothers me a little bit. But gosh, the application of AR using AI to not sort of replace reality with great, console level graphics, as you mentioned, but to augment it just enough, nailing the level of abstraction such that if I look at a sign in Japanese, it just translates it to English. I'm not playing Blade Runner. I'm not playing Fortnite on my glasses. Instead, it's helping me. It's augmenting my reality. There's so much I want to unpack here, but maybe we can start by talking about Frame, its genesis, its intentions, and then we can go from there. I do want to, at some point, get to talking about how do you bring a physical product into the world? Like, as a software engineer, you just write code, push it to GitHub, deploy it on the cloud, boom. This is a physical device. What does that look like? So, but let's start maybe with just the genesis of the idea. I think you mentioned that, but the intention and what you hope it would be.
Yeah, we can save I think the production and the hardware side is very much, that's more like a therapy session. There's great trauma to unpack there. So we'll save that for later. But so I'll show you. They say it's better to show than tell.
Oh my goodness, you've got a pair.
This is my frame. Okay. I've got the H2O. Incredible. This is Mr. Power, little battery inside with USB-C down at the bottom. And Mr. Power charges the frame. When you take it off, the device boots up. I don't know if you can see there, but it's a little emoji. It kind of waits for you. And it's got really, really thin arms, weighs about 39 to 40 grams. And it's about the same thickness and weight as my own glasses. Frame's awesome. Frame is really cool. And we have GPT-4o now integrated with Frame. I don't know when this is going to go live. Maybe GPT-5 will already be released. I have no idea. So your listeners might be like, what the hell is the big deal? But okay, we're maybe 48 hours after the announcement of this model, and we got it in within, I think, 2 hours, 3 hours after the API was released, and we've
was it just changing a config flag? Was it just changing the model parameter in your OpenAI SDK, or
it was pretty quick? Yeah, it was pretty quick. There were a few other things we needed to do to integrate it properly into the assistant and device sort of heads-up experience, but it was pretty quick. and it's been phenomenal. So I think the demo, I mean, certainly the announcement video, but also like all these little demos that they've released since then, um, have been beautiful articulations of how streaming multimodal AI, what they're calling an omni model, right? I mean, that integrated into glasses, seeing
Yeah.
your life and just you dialoguing with it. I think
Yeah.
that's where all of us want this technology to go. And I mean, OpenAI is pushing the envelope on this stuff. They're killing it. So yeah, this is
Yeah.
Frame.
Incredible. And if you're just listening to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, you get on YouTube because that's so cool. I wonder if you're able to show us the augmented reality through the camera of your device. Can you do that? And again, for
And
listeners on audio, I'm really sorry, but this is so cool. Um,
this is the hardest
it,
bit. So the arms have to
yeah.
bend. My camera is
Okay.
right here.
I mean, if you can't, it's fine. I'm just pushing the envelope a little bit.
Let's
Oh,
see.
I see it. I see
You
the
see?
emoji.
Yeah, this is like a little kind
Almost.
of a little ready state emoji there.
Yeah, got you, got you. So it's just that little rectangle that is
Yes.
your augmented world.
Yes, that's right. And you see
Interesting.
straight through it. Here,
Wow.
I'll put it on some
This
big
reminds me of Google Glass all those years ago. Okay, I see. That looks fashionable. I can sort of see your little. So it really is just a tiny little screen that's in front of your eyes that
Yeah.
is close enough that it's not blurry and it sits well in your world. Incredible. Man, I cannot wait to
Right.
receive mine and play with it. So, okay, let's talk about GPT-4o and its application here. GPT-4o introduced near zero latency for audio conversations through a ton of great innovations, but also video inference seamlessly.
Yeah.
Frame, the device, has a camera. Do I understand correctly that I could just fully interact with GPT-4o using this? Meaning, so a use case. I wake up in the morning, I put on a nice outfit, I go to my mirror with my frames on, I look at myself and I go like, help me adjust my outfit, and it just does. Is that far from reality? Is that how it does work?
It's not far from reality. There is, it's a good problem to have. There are capabilities in this model that allow for interoperability and interruptibility, excuse me, and near zero latency dialogue that we weren't able to get from previous incarnations of models, either from OpenAI or Anthropic or others. And so we are catching up on the firmware side to be able to accommodate, the mic and how audio is processed and sent off device to keep up with what the model is now capable of. But
Mm.
it's all doable. Our team is hard at work doing that, and that is not far from what you'll be able to do with Frame. Yeah, just wearing it, looking at yourself, whatever you're wearing, and just being like, "Yo, like, am I just right for the weather? What's going on today?" And hearing
Incredible.
it talk back to you. Yeah.
Incredible. And so to prompt the assistant, and the assistant is powered by OpenAI's GPT-4o, but it's not OpenAI's GPT. It's not just a wrapper on it, right? It's you've got this assistant called Noah. Noah is open source. I do want to talk about that. And how it works. Again, I've yet to receive mine, but I've been following it closely. I put it on, and there's a button. I tap this button, and then I start talking to Noah, and that's when I would say, "Am I dressed appropriately for the weather?" and so on. Fantastic. I
Yeah. So
really,
there's maybe just a few points on Noah. Noah is, you're right. It's not just sort of a wrapper around GPT. GPT is the model we use to reason over speech. I mean, especially now we're relying on GPT-4o. It's reasoned over speech and does some function calling or tool selection. So it finds the right sort of model subsequent to answer your question. But it really depends on what the user wants to do. So if the user wants to ask a question about the weather, right, something pretty
yeah,
mundane, it's a text response, GPT-4o can handle it. If you want to do a vision query, GPT-4o can handle that too, as we know. If you want to do an image generation task, and we have a fine-tuned stable diffusion model that we've also integrated with Noah, then you look at what you want to look at, and you just tell Noah, hey, like turn this pot of flowers into a turtle, and it will apply a lot of creative license to that, and it'll send that to the Juggernaut XL model, and it'll show that holographically in front of your eyes, that newly generated
wow,
image. and you can keep iterating on that. Things like translation, of course, but then we rely on Perplexity for web search as well. So yeah, I mean, and we can just keep adding models, that bring a wider range of capability. The beauty of open source, I know we were going to talk about that in a bit, but the beauty of being open is that not only is this inspectable and modifiable, but developers can keep adding new models. I mean, either their own sort of custom or proprietary thing, or something open that they've trained on a proprietary data set, or just something from a third party that they thought was really cool. So it's an open library, and people can just keep adding models and get up and running with no frame.
Man, I can't wait to. So I spend quite a bit of time writing code. I'm currently working on a framework for web developers to work more effectively with AI agentic workflows. What that means is just the layer between code and an agent with tool calling and reflection it disappears. This is my thing that I do when I'm not hosting a podcast. But in any case, I can't wait for the day where I wear frame, look at my code, something doesn't compile, and just go like, Noah, help me. and it looks at my laptop and is like, yeah, you've maybe change this interface or something. That is, I can't wait. That sounds so cool. You mentioned that Frame is a reinvention of eyewear for the AI era. Is that how this differs then from the others? Because I know Amazon's got Echo frames, Meta has the Ray-Bans, Microsoft, of course, and Apple has the Vision Pro. However, like we already talked a little bit about Vision Pro. Vision Pro has Siri as an assistant. Siri has the reputation that Siri has. I don't even consider it AI at this point. And I'm pretty firm on that because at home, right? I say, hey, Siri, play me a song. Play me Sprinter by Dave or something. It doesn't. It's almost like rebellious AI. And it will say, working on it, and then nothing happens. I don't consider that intelligence. Not even if it's a human being and I'm like, hey, can you please play me a song? And they go like, what's a song? That just isn't a very intelligent thing to me. And so maybe that's a bit harsh, but in any case, the question I'm asking here is, you mentioned in various interviews, in various social media settings, Frame is different. Frame has a different approach. It's not about, like you already mentioned this, it's not about console level graphics in front of your eyes. It's not about a closed walled garden. It's about an open source ecosystem that developers can extend. I'm wondering if we could dive a little bit more into that in the context of differentiating from Echo frames and Meta Ray-Bans and so on.
Yeah. I think the paradigm shifted. I mean, there's a lot to say, but maybe I'll zero in on this as a sort of the high order bit. The paradigm has shifted such that you can keep something open, and yet it being open is not dichotomous or is not in conflict with the core user experience being natural, being useful, being broadly capable. And so I think in the last few decades, the old paradigm was to do good software, good hardware, at least for consumer electronics companies, and to integrate that deeply. And that was your kind of that level of the value chain where companies like Apple sort of made their money and really established themselves. At least Apple when Steve came back. And so I think the paradigm shifting again, where you can have something totally open, you can through that enable a broader kind of swath of creativity from developers, from hackers, builders, people who want to do really cool stuff with this. You don't kind of foreclose all of that in the way that a closed ecosystem might, but at the same time, you can deliver the kinds of natural interfaces and broad capability that things like GPT-4o and other models are allowing. So we're kind of looking at this and we're like, wow, this is an era where the closed, tightly integrated models are going to struggle increasingly. You mentioned all of our favorite assistant, and some announcements are going to be made, I think, at WWDC, which is exciting. Where we hope that we can see more running on a phone because Frame pairs with your phone, and so we'd love for your phone to be able to do a lot of heavy lift that reduces latency, it reduces costs, so it's all trending in the right direction. But they're not going to be able to do it on their own. This is some pretty core technology, but Apple's going to need to lean on, if the rumors are to be believed, and we'll see. But they're talking to folks like Google, they're talking to folks like OpenAI, to outsource that depth of core technology is very un-Apple. And I think that we're beginning to see the old model become sort of stretched in new ways. It's not at all to say, I'm the first to always say, never count Apple out. And so, they'll learn, and they'll sort of evolve in the way that they always do. But I think that in this day and age, you can do something open and hackable, extensible, but at the same time, useful for an increasingly broad number of people. So that's the prospect of all of this. Maybe the last thing I'll say is, we're also open because in this day and age, computing is about to shift, and these technologies are all about to become so much smarter. We think there's a principle for all of humanity to be able to inspect and understand and modify what is built. That, computing never worked like that. And yet now we're at this point where the many billions of our fellow species who inhabit this planet are using a computer in some shape or form. And not just using it for fun, but using it like mission critical. And so in this next paradigm, we really hope to usher in an era when the computing that all of us rely upon can be open, such that we can all contribute to shaping what it looks like for ourselves, for our families, for our community. There is a justice in that. And that's really, in principle, why we're open.
Fantastic. Wow. That last statement was so powerful. And I will probably post like a shorter form clip of that, because I think more people need to hear that. Would you say that, in software, we have levels of abstraction? People building on the web work primarily in JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. JavaScript is a very, as you know, very high level programming language, and that compiles down into machine code via a JavaScript engine, which is usually implemented in a lower level language like C or C++ or Rust. In software, that's the levels of abstraction. Would you say that in sort of product or business, we have similar levels of abstraction between open and closed? And the reason I ask this is because a lot of people say Apple is a closed system. Apple is a closed system. And this may be true. However, they do have an app store, and they give you SDKs that make their system less closed. For example, they have these kits, Vision Kit or Phone Kit, whatever it may be, that allows developers to sort of contribute to their system without compromising the experience, that premium Apple experience, without introducing security issues. And if we look on the other side of the level of abstraction, like Android, Windows, it's a more quote unquote open system, but it's also a less curated system. Antivirus software is more prominent on Windows machines than on macOS machines for this reason. Android devices get rooted and then get completely bricked, or they can. So I see a spectrum here. I'm curious if this is something. I'm not curious. I'm pretty confident that this is something y'all have thought about. Where does Frame bias towards, or does it try to be like bang in the middle? Like we want to balance openness and prioritize a curated, high quality experience.
It's the latter. You hit the nail on the head. We do think that there's a path to being open and all of the benefits that brings, and at the same time bringing some of those sort of sentiments, the predilection toward quality and curation, security and privacy, that these things do not have to be at odds with each other. And I think in the past, just because certain companies emerged at one extreme end of the spectrum and other companies emerged at another extreme end, we have perhaps erroneously thought that there is a dichotomy here. You've got to choose one or the other. If you're open, it's insecure. If you're closed, it's more secure and curated, but you're not enabling me to do cool stuff, and it's not true. So we do think that there's kind of a third path here, and that's what we're trying to walk.
Fantastic. What are some, how basically does one strike that balance? Since so much thought has gone into this, y'all probably have ideas, and I'm asking for the listeners who are maybe also wanting to introduce products, what's the best protocol for landing close to the middle there?
I mean, so we're so early that this will evolve as our platform and our
For
devices
sure.
grow in complexity, but we try to separate things in terms of tools and data pipelines. So um, tools are always open. Things are open and modifiable. But then there's these little pipelines that sort of run discreetly, through frame and then up to the server, and they carry data. And these pipelines need to be treated with the utmost security. That for example, encrypting end to end, and eventually being able to get something secure on the chip that sits within frame, so that we can encrypt on that end on silicon, and we can do the same thing on the phone's end. And then, of course, up in the cloud, when we start capturing more user data, then we literally host it on a server with your name on it and hand you the keys, so that there is no way for anyone, even us, especially us, you should trust us like you trust. Hopefully, maybe this is a bad analogy, but hopefully you trust a bank to custodian your assets. I know not all of us love the banks that we bank with, but you trust a bank to custodian your assets. They're not going to give anyone unauthorized access. You can move your assets wherever you want, and they're safe and secure. You should trust the company who is custodying your data, your life's data. So that pipeline, we want to treat that end to end with incredible security, a lot of privacy. But all of the tools and infrastructure around that make the whole kind of user experience, the intelligence, the processing, everything that developers can hook into, and everything that can run software, all of that is open. So, we try to segment things in that way. And that's how we want to walk that path.
Fantastic. I have so much respect for that, and I do believe that's exactly how Apple works too, right? Like the the core of your iOS system, the secure enclave, which stores your Face ID information. All of that is part of this data pipeline you mentioned that nobody can touch. And I know this because I've built things for iOS. However, I have access to the networking stack. I could send a network request just fine. TLS termination will happen if my server implements it, and everything's just going to follow. So I love that that's the way. I also think there's value in keep being open about these things. Like you said, giving someone a server and going like, "This is yours. Here's your keys. I don't want to know anything." And we see this trend even with Meta, the company notorious for stealing people's data. Will do end-to-end encryption with WhatsApp, for example. So incredible, very very cool. I want to talk a little bit about the costs involved here because part of my very very quick decision to even buy Frame is the fact that it costs 1/10 of the Apple Vision Pro. If that, I think it may be less depending on shipping and so on. That's incredible, but I know that GPT-4o is sure it's cheaper than GPT-4 Turbo, but it's still pretty expensive, especially at scale. There's actually a great article. We'll maybe put a link in the show notes by one of the engineers at Opensourced, where they talk about how they've mitigated these costs. But to ask you the question more directly, what's the strategy there? Because that's expensive. Running a server and giving away the keys is expensive. Manufacturing the device is expensive. How can you price it so aggressively while still staying in business?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and of course, like many of us, being venture funded helps. If we were doing this without venture funding, then things would be a lot tighter. And
Yeah.
so we do have the benefit of that. But when the use case is really oriented around what is currently like server side heavy AI, what sits in front of your eyes on Frame can be a lot lighter. It can be lower power. It can be sort of more off the shelf, readily available components without onerous licensing fees that many folks who do sort of really really complex silicon will try to charge. Then you can do a device that what they call the BOM cost, the bill of materials. The BOM can be compressed to such a point where you can price it pretty aggressively, and in our case, it's benchmarked pretty well, I think, against uh,
Yeah,
consumer electronics like AirPods or the Meta Ray Bans, certainly high end pair of glasses, and yet we have pretty significant margin as well on top of all of that. So
incredible.
yeah, so we really wanted to pay attention to those unit economics early on to make sure that we weren't just sort of backing ourselves into a really painful corner. And some companies, larger companies especially, but we see this in a lot of AR startups as well. They will subsidize product sales at a loss. And startups, like we see startups doing this too. So we just think that's a really dangerous game. It's not a game that we want to play. It's not the way to run a company. And so, yeah, I mean, that's part of the knock-on effect of taking that different path up the mountain is that
Yeah.
your cost structure, organizationally, so operationally, but also at the unit economic level, looks radically different than companies that are trying to brute force the usual path up the mountain and are doing devices that are a lot more expensive, built by an army of people spending billions of dollars.
Yeah, and then doing a huge amount of layoffs after, typically. I so respect that. And I'll tell you why. One a huge trigger of mine, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, is these companies. There's a ton of them these days, shipping unfinished or partially finished products, and going, oh no, but the rest is coming. Trust me. Meanwhile, I spend, gosh, I don't know, $600 on a product, and this is the thing that I absolutely detest. And again, I'm sharing this, not casting valence on facts. I want to give the listeners the facts, but this is just my opinion. So do not listen to this as objective. I I despise this model. Like, for example, with the Oura Ring, where you buy a physical device, and then you cannot use it without a subscription. That's ransomware. Or like the what was it, the humane AI pin, where it's an expensive device, but again unusable without this cloud subscription. The fact that Frame is $350, and an open source ecosystem that I can build my own software, use my own AWS cluster. I don't
Yeah.
really need to depend on your cloud service and a monthly subscription. I think is tremendous, and I want to support that as much as I can. And I also respect. Look, I was raised by a bunch of immigrants. I've been an immigrant my entire life, and I've learned the value of debt is scary. Don't do it. And so this whole notion of we're going to try and be cash positive as much as possible. Of course, we're not going to make a bunch of promises and sell our products at a loss. For example, yeah, I think that's very very respectable. And I can't wait to receive my device all the more. Thank you for
Absolutely.
that.
And
Yeah,
I mean, you raise a good point. Like, we also don't understand why someone would put so much blood, sweat, tears, and love into making a device, shipping it, to customers, and then hold it hostage, with a subscription fee. If your team, I mean, our opinion is like, if your team really believed in this device and cared enough to make it because it's hard, and we can get into that. That's for the therapy session, but we can get into that. Why would you hamstring the customer experience on an enduring basis, by sort of like demanding money from them before you give them software updates? To
mm-hmm.
us, it should be flipped, that if you care about it, care to learn from how users use it and how it can be better. And just that is it's almost like raising a child, like you don't make your love contingent on things they do. You continue to just pour effort and care and do the best you can to make this the best it can be. So, yeah, philosophically, we look at that really differently.
That is so cool. Yeah, and a lot of people will make the argument that, oh yeah, but pouring into a child, you have more resources as a parent, and it's your biological imperative, but those resources are still finite, just like the billions you raise in venture capital. You have to sleep at some point. So I don't think that argument is valid. Well, thank you for that. I'm more excited. I'm actually more excited to receive the product and to build on it myself. This whole hackable open nature thing. Gosh, as I mentioned, I'm building this agentic framework. How can we adapt this for Frame? I get to play in that space, and I think this is a tenet. This is a really really important quality of open systems, or systems that are sort of this good balance between open and curated. is that you involve the user. You say, hey,
Mm.
you have a role to play here. You can extend it. You don't have to. And I think Apple tried to do this with Siri shortcuts. Some people take advantage of this. I personally don't because I like code. But that is so cool. Inviting your customer on a journey, especially if your customer is developers, right? TypeScript, we have a frame. I don't know if you have one, but we have a frame TypeScript SDK. Build whatever you want, and then share it on the App Store or the whatever. That is so incredible. And I look forward to hacking on that. Okay, I'd love to talk to you about. You said this. You said this in I believe it's a Business Insider interview. You said our aspirations have always been to make devices that foster understanding, empathy, and connection, so that this advent of intelligent computing is characterized more by genuine human well being than we've seen from the smartphone. Great quote. I think the smartphone has unfortunately been a little bit detrimental to human well being in recent times because of the scrolling algorithms and so on. But how? I guess so. A big criticism of Vision Pro that I've seen is that your experience on Vision Pro is your experience on Vision Pro. I can't, for example, invite my friend into an augmented reality world where I'm looking at a car engine and going like, okay, now show me how to change my oil, or show me how to measure. I don't know. I don't know much about cars. Show me how
Yeah.
to inspect a gasket, whatever. So we can't be sharing the same augmentation of reality.
Yeah.
Does Frame account for that yet, or is that planned in the future?
Oh man, multiplayer mode. That's I was thinking about this just the other day. Um, I think there's a lot of ways that this could work. We should chat offline. I think that there's something
Okay.
compelling here. Um,
Yeah.
Sort of networking human experience as we're all kind of traversing the world doing our thing. Yeah, we,
Yeah.
we don't have any firm ideas in that area yet, but
Oh, I'd
we
love to talk more about this offline
yeah.
because I have friends. For example, you talk about bumping up against the form factor of a phone. I have friends who they've got hundreds of little Google Maps like stars on their favorite restaurants, and every time I meet them, they pull out their phone and they go like, "Hey, look at my map with all these markers." And I think, well, that's cool. I would love to be wearing my frames, walking around my city, and see the fact that, hey, Irina just left me a marker for this restaurant because she thought of me. Let's go try it. Anyway, that's a future I want to see. That's a future I'm happy to help support. Okay, we talked a little bit about the other products in the area, sort of the the humane pin and so on. Also, the Rabbit R1 device, right, by Teenage Engineering, which recently was reverse engineered and found to just be an Android app that people run on their Android devices now. Again, this is not to cast any judgment on these. But what I'm seeing is what I'm hearing in the zeitgeist. And I would love, if those founders want to come on and talk about this, I'm definitely not opposed. What I'm hearing in the zeitgeist is a lot of these products are sort of riding a wave that GPT-3 started. And this is not my take. This is the zeitgeist. Years from now, these won't exist. The bubble will pop, and like I heard some wacky statistic, like 90th percentile of AI startups just won't exist. So that's one fact. We're also seeing the fact that many of these products just aren't, they don't work. For example, the humane pin, I don't have one, but from all of my peers who are like reviewers in the space and content creators, like this projection onto the hand, while novel and cool, I'm sure you know what I mean. People went, no, this doesn't. I don't want to hold out my hand like that and then distort it in space. With a product like Frame glasses, none of it, what I respect is it doesn't try to be more than it is. It's a little screen on a glass in front of your eyes. That's it. Can we speak to that? Can we speak to the leanness of it? I think of the book Lean Startup, for example. A lot of these products, so the rabbit thing, why do you need a physical device with a rotary button when it can work on your phone? It really, and I saw the keynote. The founder was mentioning it. It's a replacement for the phone because the phone has too much noise to signal, kind of like you mentioned with the physical world. And while I respect that it was ambitious, it maybe tried to do too much, or with the humane pin with the projection. What are some things with Frame that you as the founder have decided we're just not going to do that because that's too much?
Well, I think as a first sort of starting point, I mean, we definitely appreciate, sort of pay homage to the phone. And I think the smartphone is an amazing device, and I think that it's taken us a really long way. So, that's a starting point. I think that the phone can be so much, and all of us have so much um, uh, mental and physical muscle memory
Yeah,
around phone usage. And so we look at that and we just think, look, don't try to be in conflict with that. Don't don't try to do what that does, but like just stay away from that territory. Instead, try to appreciate what it does well and try to hook into that. Try to dovetail, and
amplify it.
maybe amplify, extend into a new paradigm, a new way of perceiving, and something that ideally is not just aligned with how you naturally perceive in front of the eyes, but also happens to be an existing market, which is eyewear. Soon to be $200 billion a year. Many of us already wear glasses to correct our eyes, or we wear sunglasses. So that's an existing market. That's a proven sort of form factor in our lives, and many of us rely upon it. So, instead of trying to, at least this is how we think about it. Let's not try to convince people that there should be a whole new sort of type of object that you own and interact with, in addition to all of the other objects that wrist,
Yeah,
pocket, in front of your eyes. Let's try to kind of hook into something that exists and play really well with the phone. Like take advantage of what the phone does extraordinarily well and just amplify that. So that's how we've always thought about it, and we think that's a long
awesome.
journey. That eyewear market, we think of it like television a few decades ago. All TVs were black and white, and then suddenly someone flipped a switch, and households across America and eventually the world started seeing everything in color. So we think that glasses at a very near point in our lifetimes are going to just be smart. That it's not even going to be a question. Just like color TV, you buying glasses, the glasses are going to be smart. They're going to be interfacing
Yeah,
with AI, and they're going to help you do superhuman things. And oh yeah, they correct your vision. Or oh yeah, they're also sunglasses. Like that'll be the afterthought. Like oh, and they'll look, they'll be fashionable and a variety of styles and colors, the things that we're used to. And yeah, they'll correct my vision, and that's all great. But they really do this thing
yeah,
that is at that future point will feel indispensable. Someone recently
yeah.
put it well. They said it'll feel like when you take them off, you're 600 IQ points dumber, and you'll be scrambling to put them back on again. It really it will feel that way. So that's why we've made a bet on this form factor, and you can go really deep there. Other
Yeah.
form factors, we're always hesitant to. They've chosen a different path up the mountain. I mean, that's just how we look at it. Like there are many paths up, and we give them credit for the courage of their convictions, just like we give Google credit for being an early mover on glass. Or, there's so many examples in history where someone's done something, it's different from what you might have done, but you learn from it anyway. And we love that there's been so much originality in consumer hardware the last 6 months to a year in a way that we hadn't seen in the previous decade. So that's something to celebrate. We think that's a net win for all
Yeah.
of us because it's just the discourse is richer. There's new
Yeah.
learning for all of us. And, some of us will find that path up the mountain.
Yeah. Incredible. I love that. It's very complementarian what I'm hearing. And I think with your glasses form factor, I work with so many founders previously in a consulting fashion where one of the hardest struggles was finding product market fit. But if you're making eyeglasses, there's already that. Eyeglasses fit the $2 billion market, as you mentioned. The only determinant here is fashion. Fashion's this confounding variable. Yes, people need vision correction, or even if people don't need vision correction, they experience eye fatigue. I know I do. Like when I'm working with a screen all day, maybe something that would help me reduce eye fatigue would be tremendous. So there is product market fit. However, fashion is this great confounder. Now, Tim Cook introduced the Apple Watch to the world's best-selling watch. Period. Not even smartwatch. And I feel like a lot of people, as an aside, say, "Oh, Apple stopped inventing after Steve left," but they forget that Tim Cook invented the watch that most of us wear on our wrists now, at least in the privileged Western world. But in any case, that form factor, I believe, took off because of its customizability, because of the strap ecosystem. A watch is a fashion statement and a time teller, and Apple fully embraced that as well with the interchangeable straps, but also the user interface. You can change the color of the face to match your outfit. Can we do that with a frame? And is this where monocle ties in? So we haven't talked about monocle yet. I did look on the website, and it's literally what it sounds like. It's a monocle. It's a piece of glass that you wear like the Monopoly guy. Is that the state right now, or is it a future plan to maybe have interchangeable glass pieces that you can then put in any frame, and to have interchangeable frames? Because I assume this is sort of the next step, given that the Apple Watch already gives you this customizability. And if you're entering a market that is not just correction, but fashion has to have a role there.
100%. I think from an industrial design standpoint, when we considered how we tackle this category, and there are many different facets to this question of fashionability and design, we decided that we could differentiate more readily, and I think more meaningfully, as a startup, by focusing on questions of weight and thinness. So we wanted to get that right first. And there's still a lot more that we can do there, but we wanted that to be something that we could showcase. Like, wow, this is light. Wow, that's thin. It looks unremarkably, or remarkably, I should say, like a pair of glasses. And so, that's where we wanted to plant the flag initially. As a startup, without all the resources in the world, very, very small team. We have to pick and choose the battle. And so that's where we decided to focus with Frame. In terms of aesthetic, in terms of the style of device, we've gone with something that is sort of reminiscent of 20th century scholars, contributors to culture, musicians, folks like John Lennon, Mahatma Gandhi. The perfectly round spectacle has been with us for a while, and it does reference something that's in our collective lineage as a species. And so we wanted that to be something distinctive and meaningful. If someone walks down the street or walks into the room wearing Frame, we want people to be able to look at it and say, I think that's Frame. I've seen that before. I think he or she are wearing smart glasses.
Kind of like the Apple Watch.
Kind of like the Apple Watch, exactly. So we wanted it to be distinctive. Now, going forward, we'll not only deepen our contribution to these questions of thinness and distinctive style and weight, but we'll begin to broaden. We'll begin to say, okay, I think we will begin to offer a range of styles. And we'll either do that ourselves or we'll do that with a partner where there's kind of a good alignment. But we can begin to broaden the number of sort of different tastes and different demographics that we cater to. And that'll be the next battle that we pick. So, for better or worse, being a startup, we can't choose all battles at once. And I know, I wear glasses. I can definitely appreciate you want to walk into your glasses shop and you want to see that, okay, there's all this range of covering every single wall, 3 dimensions. There's all these options for me. But that takes time. We'll get there. Yeah. The thing that we have going for us, unlike many of our peers who are doing smart glasses, the degree of miniaturization and sort of lack of weight, I should put it that way, of the electronics is such that it can easily bend and conform to industrial design. And so, before we chose this design for Frame, we had a range of different designs. This was actually the most challenging. We had a range of different styles that we could easily build Frame into. And so it's a matter of time before we kind of fan out and begin to offer more.
Awesome. I can't wait. You mentioned that I want to push on this a little bit because you mentioned the electronics can be miniaturized so drastically. You also mentioned on the internet that at some point, Brilliant Labs plans to embed the models, the large language models or the AI models, directly into the glasses. To me, this seems at odds with each other. Like the fact that everything is so heavily miniaturized, but you have these energy hungry large language models running on device specifically. Can you speak to some of that complexity? Is it maybe not that hard? I genuinely don't know. I've never done such stuff.
Yeah, no, it's really easy. No, I'm kidding. No, I think maybe that quote was taken out of context. I'm not sure, but the thing that we are sort of monitoring as a trend, and hopefully Apple's upcoming WWDC will just further accelerate this. We are excited about having models locally about your person. So definitely not on frame. Frame's hardware is way too constrained to run, a generative AI
Yeah.
model, a large language model. You can do some very sort of capable machine learning models, using like TensorFlow Lite or something really lightweight to just interface with what the sensors are picking up. You can put that directly on frame, wake word stuff. But large language model AI, that stuff needs to go on more robust silicon
Yeah.
than we're running on frame. So we think the phone can be really valuable in that regard. Already there's people who are running like quantized models on a Raspberry Pi. We've all seen some demos in the last month or two of someone running Llama 3 directly on an iPhone. And so I think that's going to, the Pixel's got Gemini Nano on it. So that trend is going to just pick up speed, and that bodes really
Fantastic.
well. Cost, latency, privacy, all of that's really good. And, my kind of intention there and what we are, really following is that the models should be closer to your person, and that there's some probably really heavy duty stuff that still happens up in the cloud.
Yeah, I love this. It's a multi-layer approach. Thank you for clarifying that, by the way. I didn't fully understand the nuance of that quote, as I suspect many listeners didn't as well. And so what I'm hearing is a multi-layer approach where the large general layer can live somewhere, but the highly personal information is on device. And I think that is in line with the work that I've been doing as well. I've been fine-tuning, what was it? It was the model from Mistral. Yeah, Mistral 7B Instruct version 0.2. Fine-tuning that for highly personal stuff, so medical records and so on, while also relying on the base model, Mistral 7B, for the general language stuff. So I think that's a trend that we're also going to see. I think we'll probably put out some type of course or something on how to do that, because I think that information is important to ensure, as you mentioned, privacy, safety, and so on. Okay, I want to get into this therapy session of bringing a physical product into the world after my next question. But before that, you mentioned earlier the Google Glass, as we celebrate the form factor a little bit. Why do you think it failed? Because I think it failed. I mean, Google sunset it. I don't know if that means it failed. Google sunsets a lot of things. Maybe it means it's, I don't know. But there was a time in history where you have this like Dragon Ball Z, like Vegeta style thing in front of your eye. Google, I actually did get to try it. Maybe that's why it failed, because it wasn't there. I'm curious if you could speak about that, and then how Frame builds on top of that in a safer way.
Yeah. We spent a lot of the early sort of period after we founded the company just trying to learn from what others had done, and Glass is like a really prominent example, kind of the OG in the space. I mean, frankly, we give Google a lot of credit. They were an early mover. I think it was 2012 when they made the initial Glass announcement, and that captivated my imagination and a lot of others who are working on this. So we give them a lot of credit. Should they have sunsetted it or too? Did they do it too early? Should they kept at it? Yeah, you could definitely Google does sunset a lot of stuff. But we kind of zeroed in on a couple things. One, I think the industrial design was, it was at once sort of sharp-edged and at the same time asymmetric. I don't think it was comfortable for people to be around. I think there was something a little too sort of imposing and like kind of proud in all the wrong ways about it.
I love it.
So
I agree strongly.
Yeah, and so I think that they missed the mark there. Pricing, I think it was $1,800 or $1,500, so it certainly was not. I think it was. It never dropped below 1,000 to my knowledge, but it was like, I think it was like 1,500 or something. So that's expensive. It's certainly not mass market. But then I think the third, maybe this gets to the heart of it, our impression was that they did glass as this sort of afterthought hardware to port the Android mobile experience in front of your eye. That they wanted you to walk around and like make you into a literal Android as you were interacting with Android. And like that just there's so many things that are confused about that. And so like the apps just felt really like small
Yeah.
and like I could just be doing this so much better on my phone, but like why am I wanting to do this in front of my eye? And it just I think there were a lot of things about it that didn't quite feel right. So it comes back to that notion of purpose, the reason
Yeah.
for it to exist. And I think that from glass all the way to the present day, AR has always been searching for that. And so that's kind of what we strive to learn there. But we never, I think Google is an easy one to crap on for glass, but we try not to because we know how hard it is. And like they were early. They were early in the space.
Yeah.
They had the courage of their convictions, and we all learned from it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I think it's time for the therapy session, so to speak. Again, I realize it can be hard and challenging. So if it's something you don't want to talk about, we don't have to. But I am very, very curious
Joking.
about if
No, I've got a tissue box nearby. I'm good to go.
Yeah. So full disclosure, as background, I'm selfishly asking for myself because I've had ideas for products. In over the course of my life, I was like, wow, what if we do this or what if we do that? But then they go nowhere in terms of physical products. So I'm like, where do I even start? Do I contact an investor with a supply chain? Okay, but how do I find such a person? Do I go to like manufacturing conferences and quote unquote network? I genuinely don't know. So for those listening who have a strong look, I know some of the smartest people in the world in terms of software, who just completely miss this hardware space. So can we start from like absolutely zero? Someone has an idea. You had an idea with Frame for a physical device. Where does that start to become hardware?
Well, let me just say, I mean, hardware. When I get asked nowadays, like, "Hey, should I do a hardware company?" or "Hey, should I do a physical product?" My immediate and like instinctual answer is no. I blurt it out before people are even done asking the question, and immediately you kind of see the sunken face, the shock. I think people assume I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's great, totally do it." It's painful. It's like if you're a sucker for getting just like slapped and punched and ridiculed, like if you love that, then you should do hardware because it is nonstop, daily pain and drudgery. And no one loves working with a startup. Like no manufacturer, no distributor, no fulfillment center. Startups are like, oh God, people hate working with startups. So you're like everyone's worst nightmare of a customer. And you're doing something that's more challenging than most of them have ever done before. You're more demanding. Your production schedule is more kind of lumpy and less predictable. So you're no one's best friend, and they definitely make you feel that. But what I will say is two things. Number one, I think those of us who got our start in software, you eventually reach a point where you're so conscious of the sandbox that you're made to play within and the rules and the parameters that were defined by others who made the sandbox that you are subject to, that you eventually become conscious that this is what's limiting my imagination. This is what's constraining me and many others who are relegated to playing in this sandbox by these rules. Now, some sandboxes are larger and more beautiful than others, and they have more fun toys to play with. But at the end of the day, we're all playing into someone else's sandbox. None of us made the rules. It's a closed group of people somewhere else that did, and we're all playing by it. So I went to Montessori school when I was a kid, and I don't do well in that. So at a certain point, I was like, I want to make the sandbox. I want to make the rules.
Yeah.
And I want to make rules that, allow people to bring their own toys or invite your friend that I haven't pre-vetted, but they're cool too. And I want to make it a sandbox that's reconfigurable. Like the point is, the game needs to change. If you want to make change, you got to do it yourself sometimes. And so at a certain point, I just realized that. And so that's one of the cool things about hardware is that you can make the sandbox and others can play within it. And if it's open, like ours, you're a collaborator in reconfiguring what it should look like over time. So that's one of the redeeming qualities, one of the pitches for doing your own hardware, despite the pain. The second is the sheer satisfaction of making a physical thing, like this artifact, this object. I think it was like Johnny Ive and Steve Jobs who jointly described it this way, and I fully believe in this, that physical objects, as long as they are designed with a great deal of intention and care, they are a medium through which that care is transmitted to the user, to our fellow species. And I think our work generally can be described that way. And I'm particularly compelled by the idea that something physical that you make, when someone holds it and uses it and experiences something new or writes software for it, they're feeling the love and care, the countless hours that you've put into making it and bringing it into their lives. So there is something deeply almost spiritual about that. And when you make hardware and you touch and feel it, it's really tangible as it gets. So those are like the two pitches for doing hardware. Other than that, there's no reason to do it. Distribution sucks, and component lead times are like half a year long in some cases. During the pandemic, it was, we were getting quoted more than a year for certain components.
Yeah.
Oh, let me just make sure my audio is coming through.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah. So, okay. I hear the pain. I appreciate you for mentioning the pain, but also mentioning what makes the pain worth it. Because like anything, it has to be, you have to overcome the pain threshold by the value threshold that you're creating. Cool. Now, practically, where does one start by like to make a physical thing? How did you reach out to someone with a factory? Like, did you generate 3D images and then go to a CNC lab? Like, how did that work?
Well, we did initially, and I mean, honestly, I don't know if there's a right way to start. If you ask others, they'll probably tell you, no, there's absolutely a right way to start. We probably didn't start that way. So where we start is we just let the idea guide us. The team, of course, you got to find the right team. You got to rally around this, differentiated hypothesis up the mountain. So like those things have to be in place. But once you have that in place, like we just started with sketches. We would meet up in a beautiful sort of sunlit cafe. We would do a lot of ethnographic research. We'd observe how are people using their phones, their watches, their earbuds or their AirPods, other consumer electronics in their lives. We would walk the city and try to observe, hey, on the subway, or, it sounds creepy, but it's just very ethnographic. Yeah. This is what anthropologists do. You observe people in situation, in the wild, doing whatever it is they do, and you try to pick up the gaps. Are people using what is currently available or what they currently have to strive to stretch it to do something new that it was not originally designed to do? And so we tried to observe those gaps. And I mean, that was like an incredible body of ethnographic data that really informed our exploration. In tandem, you're just sketching, you're debating, you're talking, you're sketching. In tandem to that, we were doing a lot of research into just the state of some of the affording hardware technologies in order to do AR, the optics, the power electronics, battery. So there's a few things happening in tandem. And then, of course, actually, maybe a last thought on that last piece. We also try to do not only spot checks on where things are at, but also the rate of change. So speaker technologies, for example, we don't have a speaker in frame. We're doing text-to-speech up to AirPods in your ear. And that's because current speaker technologies, there's a high rate of failure, mechanical issues. They add a lot of bulk to the arm, so they're a lot bigger than we'd like them to be, and they're quite power consumptive. But we're looking at solid-state speaker technologies from a few companies working on them that will try to integrate in future hardware. And so we try to pay attention to rate of change. Some spaces are really stagnant because, oftentimes, frankly, it comes down to like consumer electronic companies like Apple, if they're not actively trying to develop suppliers to develop some of these components to integrate them into their products, the suppliers themselves are not intrinsically motivated to really make them be everything they could be, even if it's a stone's throw away. They just won't spend that money and time. That's not true for everything, but that's true for a lot of stuff. So we try to pay attention to that. Where it's almost like when you're walking through the airport and your gate's down at the end of the hall, and there are like those fast track sort of, horizontal escalators. I don't know what you call those. And then, of course, you could do the usual walking. Like you want to look for those shortcuts. You want to look for those fast tracks down at the end of the hall. And so, like we try to get a sense of that. So it's for us it was a number of months. It was about 6 months of just sketches, research, debate, and then 3D prints. We prototyped a lot. We tried stuff on, we showed stuff to other people. We went back to sketches, and eventually we reached a point where we felt pretty excited about a concept and different paths it could take, but at least there was a core concept there, and we ran with it. We took that into development. So it's at that point that, at least in our case, and again, we might have been doing it wrong, but this is how we did it. At that point, we started talking to a supplier. We've always had the team in place to do core design, and that's both electronics, optics, as well as mechanical and industrial design. So kind of the whole thing. We design all the core technology and design around it. But we engage with suppliers early to do a lot of the what they call DFM. So a lot of the vetting of different approaches, different materials. We'll take prototyping into higher fidelity, and we'll kind of eventually work that through to something that's ready for sort of small build trials and on into production from there. That's like a gross simplification of what is a very tedious and painful, really winding path. And most of the time, you really don't know where you're going with this thing, but that's at least how we approach it.
Incredible. Okay, so you prototype, you find the supplier, and again, I'm being intentionally hand wavy here because the listeners at this point are just like, give me the facts. You find a supplier, and then you work with the supplier to fabricate it. It has the right chips and interfaces that then allow you to upload your firmware and software that goes on the complete hardware system that your supplier has helped manufacture. Great. That sounds very, very straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different best practices. They'll try to split out doing a prototype that works like what you intend, and then doing a prototype that looks like what you intend. And that these things should happen in a serialized fashion. So you don't start from day one trying to converge on something that both works and looks like, for example, frame. It takes a while until you can really converge on this. It's pretty cool.
It is.
And, instead it looks like this sort of Frankenstein, with wires, optics and things just kind of spilling off of it, big boards. Maybe it's hip mounted or shoulder mounted, whatever it is. But you focus there and you just try to get a lot of essential functionality in to test certain hypotheses. What we do is we segment out, at least in the early stage, mechanical and industrial prototyping, mechanical and industrial design, I should say, electronics and optics. And then we find these milestone points to then converge. So
incredible.
We'll start wiring these things together. Put a display attached from a board onto an optical component, and then wrap that into some kind of mechanical enclosure. Maybe there'll be one or two things mechanically that we want to test, some clasp or some mechanism, and then we find a way to carry that or wear that around with essential firmware. So we're testing a few things, but they're modularly assembled, and so then once we've tested them sufficiently, we can disassemble and then sort of diverge back again into constituent functions. Mechanical, electrical, optical. For every product that looks a little different, depending on what composes the whole thing. But with each milestone of convergence, we get closer and closer to something thin, something more functional, something that eventually interfaces with a phone app and cloud-based AI, something with optics that feel closer to the real thing. And you start to work with your manufacturer to do small batch trials. that are more about optimizing it for production.
Yeah.
The big challenge, I mean, this is the last thing I'll say, because I'm sure I'm boring the hell out of your listeners, but
It's perfect.
the pain actually comes. Development's a lot of fun. You feel like you're in the woods sometimes. And there's lots of good debate, and it's a lot of fun. But
Yeah.
the pain is when you are getting a product ready for high volume production. Because when you want to do that, everything breaks. Literally. Literally everything breaks. The screws are the wrong size. The supplier making the caps on your batteries can't make it at that spec, at that volume. Your boards are the solder mask is causing an issue with the touchpad. Like, just everything will go wrong at high volume. When you're doing ones or twos for quick validation, stuff flies. But and then of course you have to train humans in most cases.
Yeah.
How do you optimize a process at cost and speed, and so that they can build this thing reliably with high yield? And so that's the hard bit. But yeah, I mean, I'll maybe
Awesome.
leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think being prepared for that alone would be so helpful for listeners, because I have to assume you, I don't know if this is the first product you've ever put out in the world, but you may have had some expectations of things that would have been easy, but they turned out to be way harder or way more unpredictable, like this volume production, for example. Excellent. Thank you for that. I feel more comfortable now. If I wanted to bring something into the world, I have a charted path that you've so graciously shared with me and the listeners on the podcast. We're about to begin wrapping up, but I did want to ask you two things. One more philosophical, one more technical. Let's start with the technical. And that's just about the specifications of frame. We've already talked about the price. It's somewhere about around a tenth of the Apple Vision Pro. I'm saying that as sort of my attempt at marketing for you. But in other terms, in other technical specs, I'm specifically interested in battery life. How does it even charge? You mentioned clasps and mechanisms and so on, and you showed me the what is it, Mr. Power, the nose.
Power. Yeah.
Does it plug into that physically, or is it wireless? I guess that's another question I have. Is there a little thing to plug? So yeah, maybe we can talk about battery life, compute potential, and energy consumption, and then go from there.
Yeah. So frame, there's a range of sensors on the device. Camera, microphone, an IMU to detect movement, directionality, a 6-axis IMU. A few other.
What's an IMU? Is that a gyroscope or?
It's exactly, accelerometer, gyroscope, things that pick up motion. All of our phones have it, and so we've put one in frame as well. And then there's 3 little contact pads on the back there, and 3 little contact pads on Mr. Power here.
I see.
And that,
incredible.
Backward here. That is where sort of power gets fed in, and then you can plug Mr. Power into USB-C, and that's how you charge Frame. So, Frame has a processor that acts as sort of command and configuration of the entire system, and there's Bluetooth.
While you're showing me this on camera, where's the processor?
Oh, where's the processor? Yeah. Let's see if I can find it here on the board. So the processor.
This is so cool.
Processor is.
Wow, that's tiny. And for the listeners, I apologize. This is just so cool. You have to watch this on YouTube. Oh my goodness, that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
So that's a processor from Nordic. And then on the front here, you've got an FPGA. It's sort of that larger chip right there. And the FPGA sits in the video path. So that interfaces between camera and display. We run some pretty heavy-duty JPEG compression on that FPGA, and interfaces with a few other elements as well. You can put really lightweight machine learning models, computer vision models on that FPGA to sort of do saliency or clean up what Frame pulls in off its sensors. So there's quite a bit on this device that you can play with. And then of course Bluetooth 5. So that's what pairs with your phone, and data gets transferred back and forth over that.
Incredible.
So
What's an FPGA? What is that?
Well. Oh, An FPGA is a field programmable gate array. So it's a chip that is this really interesting hybrid between like hardware and software. Um, Usually, microprocessors, they are like these hard coded kind of discrete blocks of stuff. So there's like a
Mm-hmm.
block that does audio, there's a block that does video, a block that's RAM, different blocks. And who decides what these blocks are and how prominent they are? And it's some big company somewhere whose engineers somewhere thought that this
Right.
would be
They
really cool for
create
a
the
chip.
sandbox.
They create the sandbox, exactly. So even the sandbox ultimately has to answer to a sandbox, which is why companies like Apple and increasingly others want to do their own silicon. So
Mm.
that's for the next podcast. Um, uh, right now, we rely on FPGAs because processors are useful, but there are times when you want a really capable chip that can be where the blocks can be reconfigured in software. So programmable, right? There are these little kind of like gates that you can
Yeah.
program in a near infinite number of ways on an FPGA. And you can do all kinds of workloads. And because you can reprogram, it means the chip is optimized for those workloads. If you wanted to do the same things on a processor, it would be highly inefficient because the blocks in the processor were designed from someone far away without the knowledge or the intention to do what you're trying to do with it.
Mm.
So FPGAs are useful for that reason, and oftentimes in complement to a processor.
Yeah.
So
So an
processors
FPGA
are
is
like,
sort of, if we can speak metaphorically, and I want to make sure I understand this right, an FPGA is sort of you creating a sandbox in someone else's sandbox.
yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think that's an interesting analogy. Yeah, I mean, we kind of think about it, at least in our case, it's like the processor is the jockey, the FPGA is the racehorse.
Right.
At least that's the relationship between the two. But yeah, because it's open as well, people can write code and reconfigure that FPGA to do even more with it if they want to get that
Mm.
deep. So that's
Awesome.
kind of some of the electronics that run on frame. Battery, I want to make sure I speak to that. So we've got two batteries at the ends of the arms here.
Oh,
On
cool. I didn't know those were
Yeah,
batteries. That's so genius placing them there. Incredible.
yeah. So these are batteries, and together the batteries you get about 6 hours continuous use. So that's if you're like constantly tapping, camera and display, everything's on. We don't think people are going to be like 6 hours in a row, just like mashing frame. So, we typically multiply that by like two. That's like what we assume is normal anticipated use. And so, 10, 12 hours of normal anticipated use. And then you've got a battery in Mr. Power himself. And so you can plug frame into Mr. Power and you get a little bit of juice to get you through the rest of
Awesome.
the day.
Incredible. So Mr. Power is not just the conduit of power, but also a power bank that you can put in your pocket and take with you to extend that 12 hours of average use to maybe 24. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Okay, last question. We made it. Thank you, by the way. This has been so informative. I'm even more like anticipating receiving my frame now. The last question is more philosophical. This is Founder CEO series on the Contagious Code podcast, and I've asked this of literally every guest, and this comes out of a discussion I had with some founder friends earlier, or even last year, where the thesis in the room was there is no reference, there is no guidebook, there is no standard for things you can expect, and we contrasted this with web standards, so HTML and CSS and JavaScript. These languages have specifications. They literally have like the keyword const means this, and that let means that. And we thought, wouldn't it be nifty if there was some type of living standard specification for a technical founder, or even not a professional CEO, but like a technical founder CEO. Not somebody who's like been headhunted as a CEO like 18 times over their 40-year career. And so if such a document was to exist, you being involved with Brilliant Labs, what is something that has kept coming up in your experience so far that you say, oh, this should probably be codified and I should tell future founders about this?
The only rules that matter are those from God and physics. That, I
Incredible.
mean, uh, we bump up against this all the time, especially on the hardware side. On the software side, I think things bend and flow more readily for what you want to do, what your sort of creative intention is. On the hardware side, we battle constantly, and we're faced with people's assumptions, preconceived notions, self doubt, and fear. Frankly, notions of this can't be done or this is impossible. And so the thing that we keep telling ourselves and which consistently pans out to be true is that the only rules which really we can consistently count on, and the only ones that we really need to pay attention to are those from God, if you're a believer in a holy script or a text, and then those from physics, because there's no denying the laws of physics, and they kind of help guide you to what's first principles. Everything else is layers of assumption and preconceived notion and, frankly, fear, oftentimes, or convenience built on top. So kind of like sediment. And so I think founders would do well to just look at every single situation and hear everything that you're told through that lens, because, or see everything you're told through that lens, because I think that would serve you well to kind of always see a different way. Someone once told me that no is the start of the conversation. Like in Israel, I lived in Israel. They said in Israeli culture, no is the start of the conversation. It doesn't mean no. It doesn't mean you stop asking. No is the start of the conversation. I think for founders, we always have to be kind of dogged about that. So that would be
incredible.
There's a million things, but
yeah.
There's one thing, especially it's on my mind right now.
Yeah, God, incredible. I mean, that also probably bolsters this drive to build highly ambitious products, because no starts the conversation. No is like, well, let me try. So I highly respect that. Listen, Bobak, it's been incredible. I mean, I've been looking forward to this for so long, especially talking about the form factor, AR, not just being a toy, but being an extension of the symbiosis between humans and machines, the open source ecosystem, and then bringing a physical product into this world. On behalf of the listeners and myself, we do not take this lightly. And I want to take this opportunity to just thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all of this with us.
Thanks so much, Tejas. This was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be for 2 hours. This is great.
Awesome. Thank you again. Thank you for joining my discussion with Bobak Tavangar. I hope you found it as inspiring as I did. I hope you learned a lot about the open versus closed system and style of building applications and hardware. Hope you learned from his experience at Apple and Microsoft. And finally, I hope you're excited as I am to get the frame glasses, use them, and unlock the benefits of an AI-enabled pair of glasses through this novel form factor. Novel-ish, I guess, given Meta Ray-Bans and so on. In any case, I want to thank you for being a part of this episode. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, I'd invite you, a great way to support it actually is to subscribe to the YouTube channel. While you're on YouTube, if you want to like and leave a comment, that would be cool too. If you're listening on Apple and or Spotify, then I'd encourage you to leave up to a 5-star review and also subscribe there. All of this really just helps me as a signal to know that this stuff is valuable and worth it. If you do think it's worth it, also share it on your social media. Like, again, all of this is just an indicator to me of interest. And if there's enough interest, I can keep doing it. If there's not interest, then I can go do something else with my time. As you can imagine, it is somewhat time consuming. So thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you to the sponsors. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.